the long run, we should encourage all people to stay in inner city. Housing is a way to help keep more Malaysians staying, particularly young Malaysian engineers to stay in Malaysia and to work for the semiconductor industry.
财政部房产估价及服务局旗下的国家产业评估学院，今天在吉隆坡世界贸易中心举办了国际房地产研究研讨会，并由财政部副部长刘镇东主持开幕。研讨会汇集房地产行业的国内外专业人士与学者，主题为重塑房地产数字时代的创新与包容性。刘镇东致辞的时候提到，发展内城区 （Inner City） 的重要性。
The Malaysian cities have been hollowing out in the last 50 years. The inner city has been hollowing out. So if you go to KL, it is a 12-hour city. It is not a 24-hour city. Most people come into KL to work and leave in the evening. So at night, there is no activities and there are not sufficient number of people who stay in the city. For those who are Malaysians, you realize that now we call Seremban, Kajang, Semanggi, Shah Alam and Klang part of KL, which wasn't the case 50 years ago. But these contradictions or paradox resulted in very high dependency on private interests, which in turn results in high carbon emission and now more challengingly, the needs for more petroleum to support such a national lifestyle. We will have to now conserve more petrol. We will have to nationally think of how to ensure that less and less people are dependent on private cars. And to reverse this 50-year trend, we will have to create more housing in inner city for the most number of people so that the next generation doesn't have to stay far away from inner city, doesn't have to own a car, they can stay in inner city, they can walk, they can take public transport to work, and they can live a healthy lifestyle without having to resort to long commute home every day.
副部长之后向媒体指出，长远而言，应该鼓励更多人居住在内城区，并在内城区增加住房存量。
The inner city should have more people, and we should turn our inner city into 24-hour cities. But what I have just said won't happen tomorrow, because what we are seeing now is the combination of 50 years of building, the way we see building, housing, and all this. So this may take 10, 15 years to reverse, but the point is that we should create an environment with less dependence on private car, more dependent on public transport, more dependent on staying around where we work, staying in the inner city rather than sprawling the city. So I think that is the gist of it. And I was also trying to point out in my speech that it is important that the real estate sector doesn't see itself as the center of the universe, but to see itself fulfilling public purposes of the overall economy and nation building. That includes, for example, we in the case of let's say developers in Penang, they shouldn't be just thinking about creating housing for foreign buyers, but they should be thinking about supporting the semiconductor industry. And what do the semiconductor industry in Penang require? They require engineers. But how do we deal with the wage arbitrage? Singapore wages is much higher, Malaysia wages is much lower. One way to deal with it is really to have a lot more housing stock so that the young engineers could stay decently, whether they own the house or they rent the house or whether the companies provide the housing. But the point is that housing is a way to help keep more Malaysians staying, particularly young Malaysian engineers to stay in Malaysia and to work for the semiconductor industry. So that whole questions of the public purposes of real estate is something that I was trying to talk about in this speech. Okay?
Yeah, but actually, how can Malaysia actually balance then attracting the profitable investments while ensuring that younger Malaysians are able to afford homes in the city centers actually?
Yeah, so we need to look at new models. For example, in the KL city, we have many buildings which are empties, and many office buildings which are empties. You have now seen in Europe, in the United States, where old office buildings are now transformed to become housing. And that is something that we will have to encourage more building owners within the city, which have empty buildings in their own stock, to start working to think about how to transform some of these buildings into housing. We must be innovative, and we must be prepared to deal with this so that young people do not feel that they are burdened by housing and they are burdened by the cost of commuting. They are burdened by everything. Once you have happy people, you have a happy nation.